Imagine waking up one day to find that the life you have been living, the choices you have made, the patterns of thought that feel uniquely yours, are not entirely yours at all. Imagine standing in front of a mirror and feeling a faint tremor of recognition, not of your reflection, but of something else staring back from beneath it. You feel the weight of unspoken memories, impulses you've never acted on, but that pulse quietly beneath your skin. It is like glimpsing a stranger who shares your face but carries a history you've chosen not to remember. The morning light pours across your room, but it feels almost interrogative, as though it is trying to uncover something hidden. In that moment you realize, perhaps the most secret part of your life is the one you have kept not from others, but from yourself. How much of what you call me is actually constructed from fragments of everything you have suppressed, denied, or forgotten? What if the most authentic version of you isn't the person you show to the world, but the person you have buried? An entire life made of unwanted emotions, forbidden desires, and stories you never allowed yourself to tell? What if every polite smile, every careful decision, every dutiful agreement has been building a mask so convincing that you began believing it was your own face? And yet, every mask cracks somewhere. Sometimes it's in your dreams, when you wake up startled by an image that feels too vivid to be random. Sometimes it's in your relationships, when an unexplainable anger or sadness rises like a tide you can't stop. Sometimes it's in moments of stillness, when you hear an inner voice you barely recognize whispering from the shadows. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But what does it mean to have a secret life buried beneath your daily existence? Is it simply repression, a psychological closet stuffed with everything you're ashamed of? Or is it something more haunting, more alive, a hidden companion who walks with you, shaping your choices, coloring your moods, pulling invisible strings that even you cannot see? Could it be that your fears, your compulsions, your inexplicable attractions and aversions are not accidents but messages, signals from that buried self? You may think you know your story, but what if the plot is being written elsewhere, in a place your waking mind cannot go? What if the person you think of as you is only one character in a larger, stranger drama being orchestrated from beneath the stage? Consider how often you behave against your own stated values, how often you sabotage your own goals, how often you feel drawn to what hurts you and resist what might heal you. These aren't quirks of personality. They may be the fingerprints of something deeper. And here is the paradox that should make you pause. The secret life you keep buried is not necessarily malicious or shameful. It might be the most vital part of you, the source of your creativity, your passion, your empathy, your courage. But because you've buried it, because you've been taught to fear it, it mutates in the dark. It becomes anxiety, resentment, depression, self-sabotage. It becomes the ghost of a life unlived, haunting the one you are living. What you repress does not vanish. It waits. And as it waits, it shapes you in ways you can't see, turning your freedom into fate. So the question you face is not merely, what am I hiding from the world? But what am I hiding from myself? How would your life look if every unspoken dream, every silenced emotion, every version of you you've exiled into the shadows suddenly stepped forward? Would you feel terror, liberation, or both? Would you recognize yourself at all? Perhaps the truest self-discovery is not learning new things about who you are, but confronting everything you've been unwilling to acknowledge. You stand now at the threshold of a disturbing possibility, that the buried life you carry is not just a collection of secrets, but an entire map of who you could become. The question is whether you will keep letting it write your story from the dark, or dare to bring it into the light. And yet, to open that door is to risk dismantling everything you thought you knew. What if you discover that your deepest fears are not enemies, but misunderstood guides? What if the shadow you've been running from all your life is the only path to your freedom? This is where we must begin, not with answers, but with questions powerful enough to unsettle the ground you stand on. Because only when the ground shakes do hidden things rise to the surface. Only then can we start to see the secret life you keep buried. You have felt the tremor. Now the ground begins to crack. Beneath the familiar surface of your thoughts, there lies a system. ancient, silent, and more powerful than you dare imagine, guiding the course of your life. This is not a metaphor. This is the human psyche as Carl Jung saw it, a vast underworld where forgotten memories, unacknowledged desires, and rejected traits form a living reservoir of experience. Jung called it the shadow, but the term is misleading if you picture only darkness. It is better imagined as a subterranean city, illuminated in flickers, populated by everything you have cast out of the daylight of your conscious self. When you repress anger to appear kind, you exile that anger into the shadow. When you deny your vulnerability to appear strong, you exile your vulnerability too. Over decades, this hidden city grows larger than the visible one, like an iceberg beneath the waterline, and yet you steer your ship as if only the tip exists. Why does this hidden system exist? Psychology offers an answer that is at once simple and terrifying. Because consciousness is limited. You cannot hold every impulse, every image, every contradiction in your waking mind at once. To function, you must filter, sort, and discard. But what you discard is not destroyed, it is stored. And because you live in societies, you discard not only what overwhelms you, but also what would get you rejected. This is why your buried life is not random. It carries the traces of your family's rules, your culture's prohibitions, your era's expectations. In a sense, you are haunted by the invisible architecture of your upbringing and your age. Philosophy has long whispered the same warning in different words. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the abyss you risk falling into when you stare too long at yourself. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote about the will, a blind, impersonal force driving all living beings beneath their rational intentions. Jean-Paul Sartre framed it as bad faith, the self-deception by which we flee our freedom and pretend to be merely the roles we play. Each of these thinkers, in his own way, was describing what Jung would later map out in psychological terms, the hidden machinery of being human. This hidden machinery is not neutral. It shapes your behavior as surely as gravity shapes your body's movement. Neuroscience now reveals how unconscious processes govern most of your decisions before you even become aware of them. Cognitive biases, confirmation bias, projection, the halo effect, are not just intellectual quirks. They are the shadow's language, a code your conscious mind barely deciphers. When you lash out at a stranger for a trivial offense, you may be discharging anger meant for someone else entirely. When you sabotage a relationship that feels too safe, you may be replaying an old story of abandonment you never dared to face. When you idealize someone to the point of blindness, you may be projecting onto them the qualities you've disowned in yourself. Carl Jung saw Tisitsu. This hidden life is both deeply personal and archetypal. It is personal because your particular traumas, desires, and secrets form its substance. But it is archetypal because the human psyche has patterns older than any individual, myths, symbols, primordial images. This is why dreams feel at once intimate and universal. They are postcards from the underworld, written in a language of metaphor. You may think you're dreaming of losing your teeth because you're stressed about a presentation, but on another level, you are encountering a symbol of vulnerability and transition as old as humanity itself. What makes the buried life so insidious is not just that it hides, but that it acts. Like an unseen playwright, it scripts your recurring dilemmas. You think you are freely choosing your career, your lovers, your conflicts, but in truth, many of your choices are reruns of an old, unfinished story. This is why you feel déjà vu in your mistakes. This is why your resolutions crumble like paper in fire. Viktor Frankl, writing from the depths of a concentration camp, observed that a person who cannot find meaning will be haunted by the ghost of an unfinished life. The ghost he spoke of is not only external suffering but also the inner void where your rejected self waits. Yet the hidden life is not simply a vault of pain. It is also a vault of potential. Every trait you repress contains energy. Anger can become courage. Vulnerability can become intimacy. Envy can become aspiration. Jung emphasized that the shadow contains not only the little monster, but also the gold, qualities of the self you have not yet integrated. Think of how children, before being socialized, display a full range of impulses without shame: curiosity, ferocity, tenderness, play. As adults, we split these off into acceptable and unacceptable, but the energy of the unacceptable does not die. It waits to be transformed. And yet, why do we resist confronting this? Because to do so threatens the fragile identity we have built. The ego is a storyteller, and it wants its story to be coherent. To open the door to the shadow is to invite in characters that contradict the plot. You may discover that you are not as virtuous as you imagined, or, more disturbingly, that you are far more powerful than you have dared to believe. Either way, the story breaks. This is why people often experience psychological growth as crisis. The buried life rises not as a gentle revelation, but as anxiety, depression, conflict, or a feeling of being stuck. Consider this. When society as a whole suppresses aspects of its collective psyche, its history, its injustices, its primal fears, those aspects return in distorted forms: scapegoating, conspiracy theories, sudden eruptions of violence. The mechanism is the same at both scales. What is buried becomes fate. If this is true, then the hidden life you carry is not just a private matter, but a microcosm of a larger human drama. In confronting it, you do not only heal yourself, you participate in healing something transpersonal. And so the tension grows. The problem is not merely that you have secrets, but that those secrets have you. They act through you even as you deny them. They wear your face in moments you regret. They shape your relationships, your ambitions, your very sense of reality. The longer you keep them buried, the more they define you. But here is the whisper that begins to sound beneath the dread. If what you repress is shaping you in the dark, then bringing it into the light could be transformative beyond anything you've known. Yet how to do this without being destroyed by it? How to approach the buried life without being swallowed by it? This is where our journey must go next. Not just seeing the hidden problem, but feeling its unseen consequences pressing into your daily existence like roots beneath a floor, cracking the boards. You sense it even if you cannot name it. The strange way your life so. Me times feels like a play whose script you did not write. You repeat patterns you swore you'd never repeat. Chase people who echo your old wounds, turn away from opportunities that seem too bright. It is as if an invisible hand is guiding you, and you are both the puppet and the puppeteer. This is the buried life exerting its gravity. Jung warned that what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. The things you exile do not stay quiet. They seep into your moods, your choices, your body itself. They become symptoms, compulsions, even illnesses. If the hidden self is not faced consciously, it will find a way to live unconsciously, moving through you like a ghost wearing your name. Consider how subtle this influence can be. The perfectionist who cannot relax may be haunted by an early experience of being loved only when achieving. The endlessly self-sacrificing friend may be acting out a childhood belief that their worth depends on being needed. The chronic procrastinator may be unconsciously rebelling against a controlling parent long gone. None of these people wake up each morning deciding, "I will sabotage my own peace today." Yet the buried life speaks in behaviors long before it ever speaks in words. This is why insight alone often fails. You can understand the pattern and still enact it because the pattern lives deeper than thought. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Before your conscious mind decides to act, neural circuits have already fired, setting the action in motion. Your decision is often a post hoc explanation, like a narrator justifying a plot already underway. Add to this the psychological phenomenon of projection, attributing to others what you cannot face in yourself, and you begin to see how the buried life shapes your entire relational world. You are drawn to people who mirror your disowned qualities, repelled by those who reflect your hidden fears, enraged by those who express your forbidden desires. Every conflict becomes a hall of mirrors, and you may spend years fighting your own shadow disguised as someone else. The consequences extend far beyond the personal. Entire cultures develop collective shadows. A society that prides itself on progress may repress its history of exploitation, only for that unacknowledged guilt to resurface as polarization and unrest. A community that worships strength may scorn vulnerability, only to breed hidden epidemics of loneliness and despair. At every level, what is denied becomes destiny. This is why history repeats its darkest chapters and why individuals repeat their deepest mistakes. We are not only inheritors of genetic codes, but of psychic codes, patterns of silence, shame, and avoidance passed down like heirlooms. But perhaps the most poignant consequence is the slow erosion of aliveness. When you bury parts of yourself, you bury energy itself. You begin to feel numb, flat, burnt out. Depression often signals not just a lack of serotonin, but a backlog of unlived life. As the psychoanalyst James Hollis puts it, depression is the psyche's cry for new life. You may misinterpret that cry as mere exhaustion or failure, but it is the secret life knocking from the inside, demanding to be heard. This is why midlife crises feel both terrifying and oddly liberating. The persona you've built can no longer contain what you've buried. Something larger wants to emerge. Notice also how the buried life distorts your perception of time. Because you are unconsciously replaying old scripts, you live in a loop rather than a line. You meet different people who evoke the same wounds. You change jobs but find the same dynamics. You make resolutions but circle back to old habits. This looping can create a sense of fate. This is just who I am, when in fact it is unfinished business. Jung believed that until you bring these loops into awareness, you are not truly choosing. You are being chose, and by your shadow. And the cost is not only personal misery, but missed potential. The shadow contains what Jung called the golden key, the dark. Your buried anger could be your power to assert boundaries. Your buried envy could be your compass pointing toward your own unlived desires. Your buried grief could be your gateway to authentic compassion. But left underground, these energies ferment into poison. This is why people sometimes feel a strange mixture of relief and terror when they begin shadow work. They glimpse not only their wounds, but their strength. They realize the life they have been living is only half a life. The buried life also warps your sense of freedom. You may believe you are making rational choices, yet your options are quietly narrowed by what you will not allow yourself to feel or want. How many paths have you dismissed because they seemed not me, when in truth, they were simply not the me I allow myself to be? This is why existential philosophers like Sartre and Kierkegaard stressed authenticity as a radical act. To live authentically is not merely to be yourself, but to confront the uncomfortable truth that you are larger than the self you have curated. The consequence of ignoring this is a life lived as a performance. You wear the mask so long you forget it is a mask. But your body remembers, your dreams remember, your sudden outbursts, your inexplicable attractions, your quiet sense of emptiness, all remember. They are the language of the buried life trying to break through. If you refuse to listen, the psyche escalates, relationships implode, careers derail, health falters. The unconscious does not punish, it insists. This is the crossroads you stand at now. The hidden problem is no longer hidden once you feel its consequences. You can continue numbing, explaining, blaming, staying in the loop, or you can turn toward the shadow with open eyes. But know this, the moment you truly turn, the old life cannot continue as it was. You cannot unsee what you see. The question comes whether you have the courage to let the buried life speak, even if it undoes the story you've told about who you are. Because here lies the paradox at the heart of Jung's insight. The very thing you fear confronting is the key to your liberation. The ghost in your life is not your enemy, but your guide. Yet a guide ignored becomes a tormentor. This is why the path of self-knowledge has always been described as a descent before it is a rise, a catabasis, a journey into the underworld. Only there can you retrieve what was lost. The unseen consequences are not a curse but a signal. They are the rumblings before the breakthrough, the cracks in the mask through which your deeper life leaks out. If you listen, they will lead you to the next stage, not merely recognizing the shadow, but rebelling against its silent rule. Rebellion against the shadow is not a battle of destruction, but a turning of the body toward a door you have long kept shut. Picture yourself standing in a dim hallway with a single door at the far end. Behind it is the life you've buried, whispering. For years you've walked past it, pretending not to hear, yet its sound grows louder with each step you take in your carefully constructed life. At first, rebellion feels like resistance, pushing back against old habits, against inherited scripts. but what you are really doing is turning your face toward that door and saying, "I will not run anymore." This is not a romantic act. It is raw, disorienting, and often lonely. Because to break free from the hidden life, you must begin by dismantling the comforting illusions of who you think you are. Carl Jung insisted that the goal of individuation, his word for the process of becoming whole, was not perfection, but integration. Integration means you stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts and instead begin a dialogue between them. One counterintuitive way to begin this rebellion is to listen to your symptoms. Rather than suppress your anxiety with distractions or medicate your anger with false positivity, you treat them as messengers. Ask your anxiety what it wants to protect. Ask your anger what boundary it is trying to draw. In doing so, you shift from seeing these emotions as enemies to seeing them as signals from the buried self. This small shift is radical. It says, "I am willing to know what I have refused to know." Historical examples show how powerful this can be. Consider Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison, much of it in forced silence. In that silence, he was not only enduring external captivity, but confronting his own internal rage, grief, and fear. By the time he emerged, he had integrated those shadows enough to transform them into an unshakable presence, capable of reconciliation rather than revenge. Or think of artists like Frida Kahlo, whose paintings are not polite expressions, but visceral dialogues with pain, desire, and identity. She did not bury her wounds. She transmuted them into images that vibrate with life. These are not superhuman feats. They are what happens when a person dares to open the door to their buried life and invite its contents into the light of consciousness. On a practical level, rebellion begins with self-inquiry. Journaling, therapy, dream analysis, meditation, these are not mere wellness trends, but tools of excavation. In writing freely without censoring yourself, you may find words appearing on the page that you didn't know you believed. In dreams, you may meet figures who carry messages from the shadow. In meditation, you may discover how restless your mind is and how much it wants to flee. All of these are thresholds, ways to catch glimpses of the self you have hidden. The point is not to master them, but to approach them with curiosity and courage, as one would approach an ancient ruin where treasure might lie under the dust. Another counterintuitive aspect of rebellion is compassion. You cannot integrate what you continue to shame. Many people approach self-work like a military campaign. I will conquer my fear. I will eradicate my weakness. But this is just the ego in armor. The shadow responds not to domination, but to recognition. You do not say to your hidden self, "I will destroy you," but "I see you, I hear you, let us talk." This is why Jung likened the process to alchemy, where base metals are transformed into gold through careful tending, not violent smashing. The gold is not imported. It was always there, hidden in the lead. Breaking free also involves taking new action. Insight without action is just another form of avoidance. If you discover that your buried anger masks a need for boundaries, you must actually begin setting boundaries, even small ones. If you realize that your envy points to an unlived desire, you must take one concrete step toward that desire, however modest. These acts, though small, begin to rewrite the script. They signal to the unconscious, "I am no longer asleep." Over time, the energy you once spent repressing parts of yourself becomes available for living. People often report a sense of increased vitality, creativity, and clarity as this happens. It is not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer divided against yourself. Of course, rebellion also means facing resistance. Your ego will cling to its old story. Your environment may not welcome the new you. Friends and family accustomed to your mask may feel unsettled when you change. They may accuse you of selfishness or not being yourself, when in fact you are becoming more yourself than ever. This is a crucial threshold. Will you retreat to please others or continue walking into the unknown? Jung noted that individuation often feels like isolation at first because you are stepping out of collective expectations. But on the other side of that isolation lies genuine relationships built not on masks, but on authenticity. You might fear that integrating your shadow will make you bad or dangerous. In truth, it makes you less dangerous. Because you are no longer ruled by unconscious impulses. A person who owns their anger is less likely to erupt in violence. A person who acknowledges their envy is less likely to undermine others. Integration breeds responsibility. It is not indulgence, but maturity. As the poet Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." The dragon you fear is the gatekeeper to your own castle. In rebelling against the buried life, you also rebel against the cultural narrative that says you must be one thing, play one role, wear one face forever. You begin to see identity as a living river rather than a fixed statue. This is deeply freeing, but also destabilizing, because it confronts the existential ground Sartre described. You are condemned to be free. Freedom means you can no longer hide behind fate. You must choose. But this choosing is not a burden once you realize you are choosing as a whole person rather than as a fragmented one. If you have walked with me this far, you may already feel the flicker of rebellion inside you, a restlessness, a curiosity, perhaps even a strange relief. That flicker is your buried life stirring. It has always wanted to be known, and as you open to it, you will discover not only parts of yourself you feared, but parts of yourself you longed for. The rebellion is not against your shadow, but against your own forgetfulness. It is the act of waking up. The next step, then, is to understand what happens when you live from this integration. Not just the relief of no longer being haunted, but the radical shift in perception that follows. Because when you stop being driven by the buried life and begin living with it in conscious dialogue, something extraordinary happens. Your sense of reality itself begins to change, the final, most powerful realization. Imagine waking up one morning and feeling a strange stillness in your chest. Not numbness, not tension, but an almost unfamiliar spaciousness, as if a window had been opened inside you overnight. The old restlessness is quieter, the looping thoughts softer. It is not that all your problems have vanished, but that something fundamental has shifted. The sense that you are at war with yourself. This is what begins to happen when the buried life is no longer buried. The rebellion of integration has brought you to a threshold where you are no longer only the persona you show to the world, nor only the shadow you had hidden, but something larger, more fluid, more alive. This is not a final state of perfection, but a new kind of seeing, a direct experience of the truth Jung hinted at. You are not merely a self, but a field of selves, a living process in dialogue with itself and with life. The ultimate truth of the secret life you keep buried is not that it is a monster to be slain, but that it is you, exiled, distorted, yet holding the very qualities you most need to become whole. When you draw that life into the light, you discover a paradox. What once felt like fate begins to feel like freedom. You recognize the patterns without being trapped by them. You feel the old impulses rise, but instead of acting them out blindly, you can hold them, question them, even use their energy creatively. This is why the great spiritual and psychological traditions all speak of dying before you die. Not a physical death, but the death of the false self, the mask. On the other side of that death is not emptiness, but a deeper aliveness. This realization also reframes your understanding of suffering. You begin to see that your symptoms were not punishments, but communications. Your crises were not random, but invitations. The very experiences you once cursed, your failures, your heartbreaks, your breakdowns, become threads in a tapestry you can now read. This is not a naive romanticizing of pain, but an act of meaning-making. Viktor Frankl, whose entire family was murdered in the camps, wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning. The meaning does not erase the wound, but transforms it into a source of wisdom and connection. In integrating your buried life, you are not erasing your scars, but learning to carry them with dignity and purpose. And here lies the most powerful shift. You begin to experience yourself not as an isolated ego, but as part of a larger pattern. The archetypes Jung spoke of, the hero, the healer, the wanderer, the trickster, are not abstract myths, but living forces within you. When you integrate your shadow, you become a conscious participant in these patterns rather than their unconscious pawn. This is why people who do deep inner work often find themselves drawn to service, art, or leadership. They are no longer acting out their wounds, they are expressing their wholeness. Their life becomes less about defending an identity and more about embodying a calling. Philosophically, this is a shift from control to participation. Schopenhauer saw the will as blind and impersonal, a force you could never escape. Nietzsche challenged this despair with his idea of the yes-sayer, who embraces even the darkest aspects of life as part of a greater affirmation. Jung's contribution was to show how this affirmation happens not in grand gestures, but in the intimate work of the psyche. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, you stop rejecting life. You begin to sense that even the chaos of existence has an order you can trust, not an order that spares you pain, but one that can transform pain into meaning. On a practical level, this ultimate truth changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive because you recognize your triggers as echoes of the past, not absolute realities. You become more compassionate because you see others' shadows as reflections of their own buried lives, not as threats. You become more creative because you have access to the energies you once spent on repression. Life still brings loss, disappointment, and uncertainty, but your stance shifts from fear to curiosity. You no longer ask, "How do I get rid of this?" but "What is this showing me?" This curiosity is the essence of freedom. This realization also resolves the paradox of authenticity. Many people equate authenticity with expressing whatever they feel in the moment, but true authenticity is deeper. It is the capacity to act from your whole self, including the parts you have integrated but not necessarily indulged. A person who has integrated their anger may choose to respond calmly, not because they are repressing, but because they are free. This is why the integrated person often seems both stronger and softer, more decisive yet more open. They are not fragmented. They are a paradox made flesh. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this final stage is the recognition of continuity between your inner work and the world. The secret life you keep buried is not separate from the collective shadow of humanity. When you integrate your own darkness, you contribute to the slow, necessary work of collective healing. You become less susceptible to manipulation by fear and hate. You become a node of clarity in a field of confusion. This is not grandiose, it is how change actually happens, one integrated person at a time. And yet, even at this stage, humility is essential. The shadow is never done. It is a lifelong companion. Integration is not a single victory, but an ongoing relationship. You will always discover new layers, new contradictions, new exiles returning home, but now you meet them with curiosity instead of dread. You understand that being human is not about eradicating darkness, but about learning to hold light and dark together without tearing yourself apart. This capacity to hold opposites without collapsing is what Jung called the transcendent function.